Hi everyone. This week we're going to talk about biochemistry, which is subject matter that will focus on different molecules that help to build certain structures, primarily within a cell context. So if you remember from your anatomy and physiology courses, we have some primary biomolecules that are essential to life. And those biomolecules make up the cell structures of a multitude of organisms. So we're going to be looking at what we refer to as the chemistry of life, which is essentially what we call biochemistry. So in this particular unit, I'll go over an introduction to some organic chemistry, and to many of you that probably sounds very scary because organic chemistry is a very scary subject, in my opinion, primarily because I'm a biologist. But for the most part, these molecular structures that we're talking about have very solid foundations in supporting all of the elements that help make life. So we will talk about carbon bonds, we'll talk about cyclic compounds. We'll also review the 4 primary biomolecules, which hopefully you have gotten at some point in your academic career up until this point. So hopefully this will be a review of the different molecular structures that are out there that help to make up and comprise cells. So those include carbohydrates, and a carbohydrate really is anything that has carbons and hydrogens inside of it. We're going to be talking about lipids, and lipids are things that have fatty acid tails that are typically associated with them. We will talk about proteins. Proteins are very essential to a lot of our cellular processes. They enable a lot of cell processes to happen inside of the cell to basically produce energy for the cell. So proteins also, and they also are useful. They're useful for they're useful in allowing these processes to happen, but they're also useful in setting up the structure. So their structural support is another function of proteins. And then nucleic acids, which are among some of the most important of all the biomolecules, because this provides us with our genetic material. And through nucleic acids, we essentially can't develop carbohydrates, we can't develop lipids, and we can develop proteins. So nucleic acids are very, very essential. So when we think about a microbial organism, we think about essentially an organism that is made up of many different chemicals. So your book refers to it as a bag of chemicals. And these chemicals will work together in order to enable the cell to survive that makes up the organism. So just think about having a bag and having different chemicals inside of it. Chemicals are chemical elements such as nitrogen, such as carbon, such as hydrogen, such as oxygen. All of those chemical elements are just thrown together in this bag. And in order to get a functional organism, those chemicals have to be structured in they have to have a certain type of structure to them to enable the microorganism to thrive and to function. And so everything that a microorganism is and everything that it does is related to chemistry. In organic chemistry, we are looking at only chemical compounds that have carbon, as I said before. So whenever you look at a molecular structure, if you see a capital C, which is the abbreviation for carbon in the periodic table of elements, that indicates that you're going to have to deal with some sort of form of organic chemistry. That's all it means. With inorganic chemistry, this is where you're going to have the presence of all the other different chemical elements that are present on the periodical table, or a periodic table. And when we think about both organic chemistry and inorganic chemistry, these different chemical elements work together again to create functional organisms. So that gives rise to biochemistry, which is the chemistry of living cells. So what chemical attributes make up living cells? So like I said, when you think about the primary structures involved in cells, we think about things like lipids, we think about things like proteins, nucleic acids, and lipids and carbohydrates, which provides our cells with a great source of energy. So studying those chemical elements as they function, as they are significant to living cells, is what we know as to be referred to as biochemistry. So let's go again over the definition of organic chemistry. Again, you have to have the presence of a carbon element. So once a carbon atom is present in a molecular structure, if you see that, then you know that you've got organic chemistry as the field that's going to be responsible for helping to understand that particular chemical or that particular compound. And with organic chemistry, most of all these chemical compounds are going to have a very significant role in the development of a living organism cell. So even though we have a molecule and it has carbon expressed in it, that doesn't essentially mean that that particular compound is going to be associated with the living organisms. But at a good majority of the time, when carbon is involved, we have some sort of role that is played with organisms. So take something, for instance, kind of like a diamond. A diamond is comprised of a lot of different carbon atoms, all tied together. Well, a diamond is not a living organism, right? So that's an example where you have carbon elements that are joined together, and they produce a nice, very pretty inorganic material, but that doesn't relate at all to anything that is living, that we know to be living. So there are some organic compounds that are out there that don't have anything to do with living organisms. Now, fossil fuels, dyes, drugs, paper, ink, plants, plastics, gasoline, rubber, tires, and food and clothing. These are items that may or may not have anything to directly do with living things. So I think your book is asking you here, essentially, which of these are not directly related to living things? So what do you guys think? Do you think fossil fuels are related to living things? What about dyes, drugs, paper, ink, paints, plastics, gasoline, rubber tires, food, and clothing? Now this, when you think about it, you think about all of the types of things that we use as humans, but which of these things really have an impact on not just humans, but other living organisms? And the primary idea that comes to mind is probably that of food. Food is the nourishment in which all cells have to have in order to generate more organic compounds. So without a proper nutrient source, a cell isn't going to survive. So bacteria have to eat and digest things. Our cells have to eat and digest things. We, on an individual level, as a complex structure, many cells have to digest food. So among all of these substances that are present, the primarily organic one that is going to be really significant to all living things is going to be that of food. So one of the key sources to help us understand chemical elements is known as the periodic table of elements. And the periodic table, it gives us great information regarding each chemical. So the chemical that we're interested when we study organic chemistry is going to be that of carbon. So you can see in the figure that the way that you're able to identify carbon is through its elemental symbol, which is going to be expressed as a C. And then the periodic table will also give you what the atomic number for that carbon atom is going to be. And that's going to be, and for carbon, we have the atomic number 6. Now, what is also listed on the periodic table is the atomic weight of that particular chemical element. And the weight is equal to the number of protons and the number of neutrons that are situated in the nucleus of the carbon atom. Okay, so if you remember the structure of a particular chemical element, you essentially have a nucleus that is comprised of both protons and neutrons, and then circulating that nucleus you're going to have electrons. And we'll go over that structure in just a second. But what I want to outline is essentially, you know, what this periodic table looks like. And where you see carbon is located, you see it's located here in our 4A column. And you can see the carbon, the atomic number listed at the top, as well as the atomic mass, which is situated at the bottom. So this is the periodic table of elements, and with organic chemistry, and as we're talking about biomolecules throughout this lecture, what you want to, some of the elements that are real critical to us being familiar with are carbon, which is here, oxygen, nitrogen, which I've talked about in the previous 2 lectures when we talk about the nitrogen cycle and its importance in assisting in the development of plant growth. So carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and then hydrogen. So among these particular 4, these are going to be real essential to life, or enabling the development of the cell structure which gives rise to life. Now there's some other important chemicals that are on here, such as sodium. We'll probably talk about sodium in this lecture at some point. Phosphorus is also kind of another one. We'll talk about the phosphorus lipid bilayer. And I think those are pretty much the key ones. Ones that you're very familiar with, you have potassium, which starts with a K, and then there's also calcium, which our bones require for growth and development. And I think those are pretty much the key ones. There are lots of elements in here that I'm sure that you're familiar with. So if you're not a nerd like me, you can just spend hours upon hours just kind of memorizing all of these chemical elements that exist on here. But let's go back to talking about carbon, so I don't get off topic. So we're talking about organic chemistry in this particular unit. So with the carbon atom, the structure of the carbon atom consists again of one carbon molecule that has a nucleus, right? And so in that nucleus, though you can't see it in the structure, you have a combination of your protons and your neutrons. And remember, that is going to make up the atomic weight, okay? So a lot of times those protons and neutrons are very equal. So you would have 6 protons and 6 neutrons, which would give you the atomic weight of the chemical compound or chemical element. And so when we have one carbon atom, so one carbon atom molecule, you have a carbon that contains 4 valence electrons. So that's 1 electron at the top of the carbon molecule, another electron at the bottom, another at the sides of the carbon molecule. Now these electrons are continually typically they have a spin that goes with them that surrounds this carbon molecule. But these electrons can be taken or paired with other electrons from another chemical element. So the most common one that attracts carbon typically, or that carbon's attracted to, is going to be that of the hydrogen atom. So if we go back to our periodic table, you'll see the hydrogen atom has an atomic, number of 1. So with the atomic number of it being 1, essentially what that means is that you're going to have 1 electron that you can pair with another chemical element. So 1 hydrogen will bind to 1 valence electron on the outside of this carbon molecule, okay? And so that means hydrogen can bind here, another hydrogen atom can bind here, another hydrogen atom can bind here at this location, and another hydrogen atom can bind at this location. So once the hydrogen atoms are added, that makes this molecule a little bit more stable. And we have gone from a carbon atom to now a carbon molecule that contains hydrogens. And so the chemical or the molecular formula for this structure would be CH4. That's 1